History tends to remember the loudest names. The conquerors. The invaders. The kings who carved their power into stone and demanded that the world look up in fear. But every now and then, history gives us someone different. A man whose power was so vast, so dazzling, that he didn't need to conquer the world. He simply walked through it, and the world changed around him. This is the story of Mansa Musa, the ruler of the Mali Empire. The man many consider the richest person who ever lived. And the king whose gold was so abundant, so freely given away, that it shook entire economies and left cities struggling for years to recover. To understand Mansa Musa, we have to begin in West Africa, in an empire built not only on military strength, but on something even more powerful, control of one of the most desired resources on earth. In the 14th century, Mali sat on one of the greatest concentrations of gold the world had ever seen. Its lands, especially the regions of Bambuk and Bure, produced astonishing amounts of gold, while desert trade routes carried that wealth into North Africa and beyond. But Mali's strength was never just in possessing gold. Its true genius was in controlling the trade. Gold flowed out. Salt flowed in. And in the burning lands of the Sahel, salt was every bit as precious as gold. It preserved food, sustained life, and powered commerce. This was the foundation of an empire that seemed almost mythical to the outside world. Then came the journey that would make Mansa Musa a legend. In 1324, he set out on the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. But this was no ordinary religious journey. This was a procession so massive it looked less like a caravan and more like a civilization in motion. Tens of thousands of people traveled with him across the Sahara. Servants, soldiers, attendants, officials, and camels loaded with gold dust stretched across the desert in a spectacle that stunned everyone who saw it. Every oasis, every market, and every city along the way witnessed something almost impossible to imagine, a ruler who moved like an empire unto himself. This pilgrimage was spiritual, yes. But it was also political. It was a declaration. Mali was not some distant, forgotten kingdom hidden beyond the desert. Mali was a world power. And Mansa Musa intended to make sure the world knew it. When he arrived in Cairo, one of the greatest cities in the Islamic world, his presence was impossible to ignore. He gave generously to officials, scholars, mosques, and the poor. Gold flowed from his hand with such ease that people could hardly believe what they were seeing. At first, it must have felt like a miracle. A king so wealthy that he seemed to turn the streets themselves into treasure. But then the miracle became a problem. There was suddenly so much gold in circulation that its value began to fall. Prices shifted. Markets destabilized. Wealth itself became distorted. According to the tradition preserved in the account you shared, the price of gold dropped dramatically, and the economic effects lingered for years. Imagine being so rich that your generosity alone could disrupt the economy of entire regions. That was the scale of Mansa Musa's power. He did not merely possess wealth. He moved markets by his presence. And yet, gold is only part of the story. What makes Mansa Musa truly remarkable is that he seems to have understood the limits of wealth. Gold could inspire awe. Gold could command attention. Gold could open doors across continents. But gold alone could not build eternity. So Mansa Musa invested in something greater. On his return, he brought scholars, architects, and intellectuals back with him. He poured resources into cities like Timbuktu, transforming them into centers of learning, religion, and culture. Mosques rose from the earth. Libraries expanded. Knowledge flourished. Timbuktu would go on to become one of the most celebrated intellectual centers in Africa, a place where students, judges, teachers, and scholars gathered in pursuit of ideas that would outlast kings and empires alike. That may be Mansa Musa's greatest secret. Yes, he was rich beyond comprehension. Yes, his pilgrimage became legendary. Yes, his gold was powerful enough to distort the economy. But his deeper legacy was not what he scattered in coins and dust. It was what he built in the minds of men. He understood that wealth locked in a treasury eventually disappears. It is stolen, spent, divided, or forgotten. But knowledge can outlive an empire. Knowledge can survive war, drought, collapse, and time itself. In that sense, Mansa Musa was not simply a wealthy ruler. He was a builder of civilization. Still, greatness always comes with a cost. The more famous Mali became, the more visible it became. Maps began to change. European cartographers placed the image of a golden king in Africa, holding a nugget of gold as a symbol of wealth beyond imagination. And once the wider world knew where such riches existed, curiosity followed. Then ambition. Then greed. The glory that made Mali famous may also have helped place a target on its back. The legend of Mansa Musa did more than inspire admiration. It awakened desire in distant lands that had never before understood the true scale of West Africa's wealth. That is what makes this story so powerful. It is not just the tale of the richest man in history. It is the story of how wealth can transform the world, and how power can leave both brilliance and danger in its wake. Mansa Musa died in 1337, but his name never truly disappeared. Centuries later, people still speak of him in tones usually reserved for myth. A king whose fortune may have exceeded anything the modern world has ever seen. A ruler whose pilgrimage turned the roads of the Sahara into a river of gold. A man who made the world stop and look toward West Africa as the center of wealth, faith, and learning. And maybe that is the real reason his story still fascinates us. Because Mansa Musa reminds us that history is bigger than the names we were taught first. That power did not rise only in Europe or the Middle East. That greatness once flourished in the cities, deserts, and universities of Africa with a brilliance the world could not ignore. His gold may have shaken the economy. But his legacy did something even greater. It forced the world to recognize a civilization at its height. And that is why, all these centuries later, the name Mansa Musa still glows like gold in the memory of history.